Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's webinar on how to configure hunt groups and work groups. My name is Heidi Eldon. I'm a quality assurance analyst here at Inflow, and I'll be helping facilitate the webinar. We appreciate your time this morning. Leading today's webinar is Tom Lyons. He's been with Inflow almost 4 years, and he works out of our Portland market. He's a senior installer with a great wealth of knowledge on hunt groups and work groups. So Tom, I will let you get started.
Excellent. Thank you, Heidi. Again, my name is Tom Lyons. I am a senior project installer for Inflow. I've been doing this for about 4 years and specialize in many multi-site deployments, which is where many of these questions get asked about hunt groups and work groups. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over an overview of the two different types of groups, what they mean for you and how you can use them in your environment. And then we're also going to go through a step-by-step configuration of both a hunt group and a work group, including things like queue handling, which is some of the more advanced features of a work group, and how to set up voicemail and even logging in and logging out of agents. So I'm going to go through those now, the similarities and differences of the group, and then we will get into configuration. So to go through and talk about what a hunt group is and what a work group is. A hunt group is a group that you actually can set up on a ShoreTel switch that will allow multiple people to get their calls as a group. So you can set up 4 or 5 people to get the same kind of calls, and you can present them at the same time or one at a time to each member. This is more of a specialized group that is meant for remote site situations where you don't have a server on site. And then you also have a work group. The work group is going to allow you to do many of those same things and even a few more things, like be able to set up a voicemail box that the entire group can use and set up queue handling features so you can actually provide things like hold music and handling options for people when they are on calls. And that is actually server-based. So with those two things in mind, there's a few different ways that you want to deploy these groups, and you can even use them in tandem depending on your situation to maximize what you can get out of the ShoreTel platform. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to share out what I'm going to go over with you here. It is just a Word document right now, and then we will go into an actual system and I will show you how things are configured. This is basically the differences and the similarities between the hunt groups and the work groups. So as I mentioned, they're both different methods of presenting calls to multiple people, allowing them to function as a group within your ShoreTel environment. They can be used separately or linked together depending on the purpose. So you may use a hunt group that forwards into a work group for voicemail specifically. And they are very similar in how they operate, but each one has a few facets that the other one does not. So choosing the right one is very, very important for your infrastructure. The main similarities, other than that they can present calls to multiple people in a group, is both a hunt group and a work group are able to set up so that you send calls to one person at a time or multiple people at the same time, or what is called simultaneous ring. A work group actually elaborates on that, and you can set it so that the person who hasn't been on the phone the longest gets the call first, or you can set up a specific round robin order. So each person gets presented a call in a specific order and it continues in that fashion. Both hunt groups and work groups can also operate on schedules. With the scheduling system in the ShoreTel environment, you can actually set up schedules for on hours, off hours, and holiday scheduling for both of these groups. And work groups also allow you to set custom schedules. So if you have something come up very spur of the moment, maybe a closure, or you have a meeting that you want to set up that's a one-time thing, you can also set a custom schedule on the work group side. And then finally, they both also offer forwarding options based on those schedule types. So you can set up a hunt group or a work group to go to one location during off hours, a different location if you're on a holiday, or for that custom mode for the work group, you can set to a different location as well. So you can actually have different spots that these calls will go to when you don't want them to be forwarded to that specific group. So those are the similarities between the two, but there are actually a number of differences, and some of them are very important. The main big piece between the hunt groups and the work groups is that the hunt groups actually reside on the ShoreTel switches on site. So at your locations that you have your gear at, like your SG30s, 50s, and 90s, that's actually where these hunt groups are set up in the system, and that's where they operate from. This is important because a lot of people have smaller remote sites that may not have a server on site, or it may not have a very robust connection back to the server, so it can talk, but expending a lot of traffic across that link is not an optimal solution. And so hunt groups are great in that case because they can reside on the local switch, and that provides the group locally so that you don't have to send a bunch of calls across a network pipe to get to those people. At the same time, there is hardware limitations because it is using the server, or rather the switch specifications instead of the specifications of the server, which are not nearly as powerful. Work groups, on the other hand, are handled by ShoreTel servers, and that can be either the HQ server or any distributed voice servers that you have set up in your environment. And this is a much more robust method of handling groups, simply because the server hardware that these will run on is much more powerful than any specific switch in the ShoreTel environment. And so that will actually tie into some limitations that I'll get into a little bit down the road here on how you can set up a hunt group. Another big difference is that hunt groups do not offer their own voicemail. A hunt group is made to be a very simplistic group that it gives you the ability to ring multiple people and then send the calls to a different destination if nobody is available. On the other hand, though, a work group is a much more robust situation with that and will allow you to actually set up a shared voicemail box for all the agents that are in the group. So if you're looking for the ability to set up that kind of system where you can have calls forwarded to a voicemail that the entire group can look at, the work group is what you want. In the case of a remote site, you can tie these together to kind of give you that option while still using the hunt group, and I will show that later on in the configuration. Another big piece is that hunt groups can actually be manually overridden to busy the group out and send calls to another destination. This is actually a big one for a number of groups who may not necessarily have a specific schedule that they always stick to. Maybe they go a little bit later depending on the day, or they just continue to help until they no longer can stay at the office, or even have to busy it out because everybody in the group is going to be gone at a specific period in time. Hunt groups actually offer the ability to busy out the group on demand using a key code on one of the phones, whereas a work group is only scheduled using automated schedules. So you don't have that capability using a work group, and if you need that kind of capability, a hunt group is the way to go. Getting into the limitations that I was talking about on the hunt group side, every switch in the ShoreTel environment is limited to 16 hunt group members total across up to 8 hunt groups per switch. So what that means is if you have a switch out at a remote site and you have multiple groups that you want to set up, you want to keep the total amount of users that are in these groups to a maximum of 16, and that does include anybody that's a part of multiple groups. So if I had an agent that was a part of 4 groups, that does count as 4 members. And you want to keep it to 8 hunt groups or lower per switch. The system will allow you to put more on there, but when you do, you run the risk of overloading the resources on the switch, which can result in weird issues such as calls being presented that your agents can't pick up or poor call quality. So this is something that you do want to watch with a hunt group. On the other hand, because the work groups are residing on much more powerful server environments, you can actually have up to 256 work groups on one server, and you can have up to 16 agents in each one of these ringing simultaneously. So work groups are a much more robust situation for this when it comes to getting many groups set up in your system that can receive calls. Another one of the big ones, and you can see it right down here, is that hunt groups will present calls to agents that are already on the phone. A work group will not. And so what I mean by that is if I'm in a hunt group and I am on a call, whether it's through the group or a personal call or another internal call with another employee, if a call comes through on the hunt group, it will still beep my phone and let me know that there's an incoming call. So it will still present the call to me, and I can suspend what I'm doing if I want to at that point, and I can go and grab that call. A work group is not set up to do that. The work group environment in ShoreTel is meant to be an environment where each agent takes one call at a time. And so if they're already on a phone call, whether it's on a work group call or any other call in the system, internal, external, does not matter. If a work group gets a call at that point, that agent will not be presented the call until they're completely off the phone if it's still there. So this is important for folks that may have a front desk that need to take multiple calls at one time and place people on hold so that they can get to everybody at one time. You would want to use a hunt group for that instead of a work group, because the work group would continue to keep the other people on hold and would not present the call until the agent was available in the system. There are ways to get around that, such as queue handling, which is a more advanced feature, which is actually the next bullet point here. Work groups offer queuing features for callers to hear options. A hunt group offers ringback only. And so what that means is when you call into a work group, if we set up queue handling, which is a advanced set of options that governs what happens when you're on a call and you're waiting for an agent to pick you up, you can set up things like music on hold, specific messaging that you can send to the caller, such as all of our agents are currently busy. We appreciate your patience and we'll get to you as soon as possible. And you can also give them options such as pressing 1 to leave a voicemail message. So these are all things that can be done within a work group. If you call a hunt group and you're waiting to be picked up, all you hear is ringing, just like you would be calling anybody else directly on the line. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have a call center environment that would make good use of that queue handling, the work group is definitely the way that you want to go. The other big piece that's different between the two is that workgroup agents with the appropriate licensing, which would be either a workgroup agent or a workgroup supervisor license, can actually log themselves in and out of a workgroup. This will actually stop them from receiving the calls. So if they have to back out of the workgroup to get some other tasks done and they don't want to be disturbed, they can actually log themselves out of the group with this licensing so that they won't receive those calls. If you're in a hunt group, there's no way to log out of it without an administrator taking you out of the group completely so that you wouldn't receive those calls. And in addition to these, both of these groups do ignore your normal call handling mode changes on the phone. So even if you put yourself in a meeting or out of office, a group call will still ring your phone. So if you need somebody who to be able to log in and out of the groups so that they don't take calls, the work group is what you want. If you don't want them to be able to log out of a group, then you could either use a hunt group or you can use a work group without that licensing so that they don't have the ability to log themselves in and out. So with that in mind, why would you want to use a hunt group? It sounds like it's a little bit more simplified than a work group and doesn't have as many features. So why would this be a big one? Well, the biggest piece to this is if you have a remote site and no server available. So if you have a smaller site that might need 1 or 2 groups and you want them to be able to operate independently, a hunt group makes more sense than a work group in that case because it's going to simplify the communications needed in the system, especially if that site has local dial tone. The hunt group will allow those users to operate with using only local resources at their site and doesn't have to tie up network bandwidth across your MPLS or VPN links back to the HQ server or other servers in order to get their group functionality. So this is not only better on your network stream, but it's better for redundancy as well, because if that link were to go down and you were using a work group, then you would no longer have that group functionality. But with a hunt group on site, you would be able to still use that group to make and receive calls and operations would still work. The other big piece to that would be if you need to be able to accept multiple calls per agent at the same time. So if you have a front desk, or if you have just a group that is used to handling multiple calls at one time, the hunt group is what you want to work with on that. Simply because the work group will not allow you to take multiple calls at one time. So using the hunt group in this situation is definitely the way that you want to go. And then finally, for a hunt group, if you need to be able to manually forward your calls, so at the end of the day, for example, maybe your group is leaving 15 minutes early, or maybe they're going to be open an extra 2 hours. That's where an automated schedule would not make sense for a group. And that's where the hunt group's ability to manually forward the calls comes into play very, very nicely. A work group isn't capable of this. It is only schedule based, which is going to be based on static times that you set up in the system. So if you need to be able to handle this in a modular environment, setting up a hunt group to manually forward those calls is really the way to go. On the flip side, why would you use a work group? Well, the biggest one here is you have a server on location where the work group is going to be. The work group, just because the way it works and the server resources it will use versus the switch resources, is typically a better choice. Even if you don't want to have the ability to use voicemail or queuing features, setting up a simple work group is going to reduce the strain on your environment that the hunt group would actually present to the switches. And instead, using that server horsepower, you're going to be able to use many more groups and not run into issues like you could potentially if you overload a switch with the hunt groups. There are caveats to that, of course. You need to make sure that you don't have a need for multiple calls presented to an agent at one time, because a work group will not do that. It will wait until the agent is off the phone before it will present them another call. Another big one is if you do need to be able to log in and out of the group. That does require licensing, as I noted before, unless you do want to go into the back end and you can log in and log out agents from the back end in the Director platform. But for your agents to be able to do it themselves, it does require licensing, but it is something that's possible. If you want queue handling options, the work group is the way to go as well. As I mentioned before, it's kind of a miniature call center environment that has some pretty good queue handling options, so that you can present options to your users when they call in, and can be routed to voicemail or to other groups. And then, of course, finally, if you want to have a voicemail box in place for the group, so if you want a shared group voicemail box that everybody can access, a work group is the way to go to that. And so that's the main similarities and differences between the hunt group and the work group. At this point, I'd like to take a quick break to answer any questions on what I just went over there, to make sure that we're all on the same page. And after that, we will go ahead and get into the configuration. So Heidi, do we have any questions?
We do. Can you indicate the answer to this? Can a DID hunt number go to voicemail if all users are busy or there's no answer?
So the way I'm understanding that, the question is, if we have a DID that's set to a hunt group, can it go to voicemail if all the users are busy? If that is the question, the answer is yes, although you would have to configure the group to go to a extension that has voicemail on no answer. So it is something that can be done. It's actually something that we do quite often, and that would be where we would tie the two groups together. So what you would essentially see is you would see a hunt group with a DID on it. The hunt group would ring your users, and if they weren't able to get to the call, then the forward would go to a work group that is set to always go to voicemail, and so that work group would handle the voicemail capabilities.
Thank you. Now, many customers like to have their call volumes of the different calls in queue posted to some type of a monitoring board. So can you talk about some of the options that they have? Well, one, do both hunt groups and work groups offer the ability to project to a call board? And we're curious if there is a solution to project to a call board to show call stats for call centers that is not just a laptop running the monitor on a TV?
Sure. So to tackle the first part of that question, work groups are much better for any form of reporting, including call volume, than a hunt group is, and this is because of the way that ShoreTel designed their reporting on the back end. Hunt group reporting is much harder to do and much more limited in what you can see versus a work group. So if reporting is important to you, work groups are the way that you want to go, especially when you tie in the queue handling features so that you can actually have an active queue with people in queue and waiting to be answered. That's where you would see these call volumes and what you want to look for. You definitely want to use a work group for that. Now, that being said, to answer the second part of the question, it's kind of a yes and no thing. Work groups can definitely be reported on, and there are real-time reports that are available through a variety of platforms. The one that Inflow uses is called BrightMetrics, and it will allow you, with the right licensing, to set up a real-time dashboard on your work group, so you can see people that are logged in, you can see how many calls they've taken, you can see the average talk time, and you can see the number of people in queue. So you get a pretty good real-time estimate of what is going on in the system. That is something that would be browser-based, so it would be running on a computer, which you would then want to project to a screen. In terms of other options, like maybe a static wallboard, those options are available, but they are typically used with the ShoreTel Enterprise Contact Center environment, which is their call center add-on to the PBX. If that is something that you are interested in, we can get you some more information on that. It is doable depending on the device. And I do believe there's licensing involved with that, but that would be something that we'd want to take offline to make sure we can get you exactly what you need.
All right, thank you. And one other question, and I'm not sure, I'm going to give you the question and then you can answer it the best you see fit. Can you set up a hunt group with members in different locations? And I'm not sure if they mean physical locations or different hunt groups.
Sure. So the answer to that is yes, you can. It's not necessarily something that I would recommend that you do, but you can. So if you have users in different locations, so maybe, for example, you have a location in Seattle and a location in Portland, but you have a queue that both of those groups would want to be a part of so that they can answer calls. So it's not necessarily a regionally based group. It is just like a big group that they both service. You can do it, absolutely. In that environment, I would probably recommend a work group over a hunt group, simply because you want to make sure that everything has enough power to get everything through. And presenting those calls across the network using a hunt group to another set of callers is doable, but it's not ideal. A work group where the server is going to be able to handle the actual processing is better in that regard, but it's totally doable. Now, if you were asking about adding multiple hunt groups into one hunt group, the answer to that is no. You can't have one call ring two specific groups. You would have to put the individual users into the hunt group that you want to have answered.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and go on to your next session.
All right, perfect. So bear with me here for just a moment. And so you should see a screen up that is actually in ShoreWare Director. And I should have prefaced with this training does go over the 14.2 edition of ShoreWare Director. However, all of the points that we're making and everything that we're showing here today does apply to Connect as well. It would just look a little bit different in that platform. So if you have any Connect specific questions at the end of this, I'll be happy to point out the differences and how to get there. But for this part here, we're going to go over how to actually set up a hunt group. And then after that, we will pause, answer any questions, and then we will do the same with a work group. So this is a sample hunt group that I have up. It is not yet configured, and I just have this up so we can go through all of the different options and explain what they are. To get to this page, on the left side, you would expand call control, and then you would click on hunt groups. When you're there, you will get a little list of all the hunt groups in your system. And all you have to do is hit new at the top, and then you would get to the page that I am on now. I have already renamed the group. It will normally just say new hunt group. I've named it sample hunt group here for our uses. And just to go through the options that you have here, so you know what you're looking at, I'm going to start with this top half here, or this top section here. The name is going to be the name of the group that you want it to be. And this does present to your callers, or to your agents rather, when a group gets called. So when the call comes through, they'll actually see the name come through, so they know what group is actually ringing their phone. Under that is the extension number of the group, and this is an important one, especially for folks that are moving away from an older PBX like a Nortel system and moving to a ShoreTel environment. One of the main points of confusion that I run into when I'm on site going through those is that people need to understand the groups actually have their own extension as well. So it works a little bit differently from the old system. So if we were to call 1810 in this regard, it would actually call the hunt group. That's the hunt group's extension. Under that is the backup extension. The backup extension is important because this is where the call will go if for some reason a hunt group or a work group gets called and it's not able to accept the call. So if the switch is having issues or if the server is down, this is the destination that that call will go to so that the call is still received. ShoreTel makes every effort to make sure that you don't drop a call even if there's a problem with the hardware on site. So this would be a spot where you would want to put maybe the top person for the specific group, maybe a receptionist or the most knowledgeable person in this area so that they can still get the call if the group is unable to respond. Below that is your DID range and DID number. I'm assuming this is probably self-explanatory for most of the people here, but just to make sure, that's going to be the phone number that the system will send the call to the group from if a call comes in on your dial tone from that for that number. If you don't need an external number, you can leave this blank and the group is still accessible using the extension number. So you can do, in that case, you could set up groups that don't necessarily need a direct number, but maybe people call in on your auto attendants and then need to get to this group. You can still set it up as an option on the auto attendant so people can still get to it in that way, but they don't have a direct number. But if you do want a direct number, you would just check this DID range box and you would select the range and the number that you would want on that group. And the same goes with the DNIS option here, which you'll see is grayed out currently. Whoops, I don't know what just happened there. There we go. Oh, that's why. The DNIS option will allow you to set up multiple numbers to a specific group, and you can even name the DNIS name so that it will show up on your users' phones as well. So if you have, for example, 3 different locations, maybe a Portland, a Seattle, and a Los Angeles, and there is a number for each one of those markets that goes to the same group, you can set up a DNIS number that will show this is the LA main line. And so they'll see it's coming from Los Angeles or it's coming from Seattle, and you can respond appropriately if you want to respond differently to those calls. Under this are a couple of options for the dial by name directory and also to make the number private. For groups, this is a little bit different than it is for the individual user. For groups, dial by name works exactly the same. If you uncheck that box, then when somebody enters a dial by name directory in the ShoreTel environment, they won't be able to find the group in the dial by name directory. Make number private just functions a little bit differently simply because the group doesn't make outbound calls like users do. But what this will do is this will actually hide the group from anybody looking in their system directory on your phone. So if you wanted to make like an operations hunt group that you didn't want everybody to know the extension for or be able to find it, you could set that group as private, and then only people that know the extension would be able to call that number. They wouldn't be able to look it up in the system in any way unless they had access to the backend page, like the director page we're on now. Under that is kind of where we get into the configuration of how the group is actually going to operate. And the first piece here is the switch. So you'll see right now we have an SG90 assigned to this group. It's actually the only option in the system at the moment. But this is where you would actually be able to select the switch that the hunt group resides on. And so this is important to make sure that you have your calls on the right switch, to make sure that you have that hunt group local to the environment. What you want to avoid, if possible, is having a hunt group in one location that's servicing members in another. Now, that being said, if there's an issue with the switch out on site, so let's say this SG90 went down, but we did have another one that was available, you can actually change where the hunt group resides on this menu by selecting a different switch in the dropdown. And so a short-term solution would be to move that hunt group to another switch that's still operating correctly, which would then bring up the ability to handle those group calls again until the switch in question was repaired or replaced. Then you have the call stack depth, and this works very similar to the user call stack depth that we went over in the last training. This is the number of calls that a hunt group is going to accept at one time. And when I say hunt group, I mean these are calls that are ringing, not calls that an agent has already answered, but calls that are currently ringing, before it starts sending calls to the busy destination for the hunt group. The default for this is 8. And the reason that this is very important is the amount of call stack depth that you set up on each hunt group actually causes the switch to use more resources. So if you're in an environment where you need 8 calls, it's okay to keep it there. But we recommend, if you're expecting no more than maybe 3 or 4 calls to come through at the exact same time, to lower this to that number to make sure that your switches won't get overloaded. That will actually help you greatly in the long run if you're going to use a number of hunt groups. Distribution pattern is how the calls are presented to the agent. And you have 2 options in hunt groups. You have the ability to send a call top down, and you also have the ability to send a call simultaneously to multiple groups, or to multiple members rather. The top-down method will actually go in a list order based on the users that you put into the group, and it will always follow that order. So what it would do is it will call agent 1 first. It will ring however many number of rings per member you have set up here in the rings per member, and then it will go to the next person. As soon as the second call comes in, it will follow that same pattern, and it will start with agent 1 again. So it will always start at the top of the list. Simultaneous ring is exactly what it sounds like. It rings everybody in the group at the same time until somebody's able to pick up the call. And it will continue to do so until the no answer number of rings. When you configure a group like this, if you are going to do a top-down scenario, you want to make sure that your rings per member matches up with your no answer number of rings in a way that makes sense. So if you have 3 agents in your group, for example, and you want each one of them to ring 3 times, you would want to set your no answer number of rings to 9 to ensure that each member in the group gets 3 rings before it would go to the no answer destination. Otherwise, if this were set to 4, for example, the first member would get 3 rings, the second member would get 1 ring, the third member would never get the call, and the call would be forwarded to the no answer destination. So if you ever run into a situation where something like that is occurring, this is probably where the issue is. Under that, you've got 2 little checkboxes here: call member when forwarding all calls, and skip member if already on a call. Call member when forwarding all calls is for situations where you have groups that might have externally assigned users, or users that are going to always forward their calls when they're out of the office. This will still send calls to those destinations if they're forwarded, if that box is checked. If this box isn't checked and somebody is externally assigned, or they're set to always forward to somebody else, the system will actually not present the call to that user. So that's something to keep in mind there. So if you have people that go out and use cell phones and they need to still be able to answer these calls, you want to make sure that box is checked. The other option is skip member if already on a call. And remember when I talked about workgroups not being able to present multiple calls to an agent at one time, this box will actually stop a hunt group from doing the same. So if you have a need for a hunt group, like you have a small remote location that maybe has one T1 back to the main office and it's being used for data, so you don't really want to send a lot of calls over it. But you still don't want your agents to have to handle more than one call at a time or even have the beep in their ear to hear the other call come through. You can check this box and the system will actually notice that they're not on, or that they are on a call, and they will not be presented the hunt group call. It is off by default. So if you need that, you just want to check that box. And then under here are your call forward destinations. So you have a few different destinations. You have a call stack full destination, which is also known as the busy destination. You have a no answer destination, which is where calls go once you hit the no answer number of rings and somebody hasn't been able to answer the call. You also have an off hours and holiday destination, which in a hunt group is the same destination. So for each one of these, you can actually specify a specific spot, so another extension to send calls when these requirements are met for the call to be forwarded. So you could have a busy destination, maybe go to a voicemail box so that somebody could leave a message. You could do the same with the no answer destination, or maybe move forward to another group if you wanted to tier a bunch of groups together. And then you can do the same for off hours and holiday. Now, hunt groups do handle this a little bit differently from work groups as to how calls are handled if there's no option set. With a work group, you have to set an option. But with a hunt group, you can set it up so that it would just play a busy tone if there's no destination specified. So if you want your calls to just busy out after 5 calls come through, for example, you could set your call stack def to 4. And then on the 5th call and anything past that where calls are still ringing, they would get a busy tone if you don't have a destination you want to send the call to. If you put a destination in there, it will go to that destination instead. And then for no answer, remember, a hunt group only rings. It doesn't present music on hold or any options. It would just provide ring back like you're calling a normal person. You can either set up no answer to go to another destination after a certain number of rings, or if you just set this to be blank, the calls will continue to ring for 4 minutes, at which point, if it does reach that 4-minute mark and nobody's been able to get to the call, it will actually disconnect the call. So that's important to note. If you want to have one group that's supposed to be handling these calls all the time, you can do that. A better option is to set up a couple different hunt groups and have them go back and forth between each other so that you can leverage more people and also make sure callers are not hung up on. These drop downs here, the on hours and the holiday schedule, are where you actually set up the schedule for the group if you want to set one up. And then the off hours and holiday destination is entered into the hunt group right here. So that would be where the calls would go automatically if there's a schedule applied. If there's no schedule, then you will not be able to, or not that you won't be able to, but if there's no schedule, then you don't need to enter anything here because calls are not going to be going anywhere. Okay. And then under here, current call handling mode is going to be where the system will tell you the current call handling mode of the hunt group. So if it's in on hours, it's going to say on hours. If it's off hours, according to the schedule, it'll say off hours here as well. So this is a spot where you will be able to see what call handling mode you are currently in. If you're seeing one that is not meshing up with the schedule that should be on the system, then there may be something going on with the hunt group or the switch. And a easy way to fix that is to briefly remove the schedule and reapply it. It's a troubleshooting step that I've seen multiple times. Bear with me here. It looks like Director is going to try and auto log me off to the main menu here in a moment, so I'm going to refresh my page. Oh, it already did. So let me go ahead and get back to where I am here. There we go. And so that's how the call handling modes work on the group. And then under here, this is actually where you would enter the members into your group so that you can set up who is going to receive those calls. And so you'll see two panes here. On the left are all the people that are available to be put into the group, and on the right are the members of the group. And you can actually filter by first name, last name, extension. So you can find somebody very quickly. So if I wanted to add 1700, which in this case is just a default auto attendant, I could actually put 1700 in here and hit apply, and it's only going to show me that extension. If I wanted to see everything starting with 17, I could do that as well. In this case, there's only two different options. And then I can also clear it and hit apply, and I'll bring it back. To add people, you would just highlight them, and you can hit add. You can also, if you so choose, you can hold shift and select a range of users, or you can hold control and select whatever users you need. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit add over here. And so now you'll see that the 4 users that I had highlighted are actually part of this group now if I were to hit save. The other reason I wanted to show this here is if you look at the way the list operates here, this is how top-down operates. So in this particular case, if we were to actually save this group and it were going to be a production group, when the group got called, the user labeled as Michelle Hartstrom would actually be presented the call first, then it would go down the list. And then the next call would continue that, and it would start with Michelle and work their way down. If you need to remove a user, you can hit the remove button here, and you can do the same thing on the right side. You can do a range, or you can do individuals here. And then if you need to change the list order, instead of having to remove and re-add, you can actually use these move up and move down buttons so that you can change the list order. That's not important if you're using simultaneous ring, but for top down, that is important there. And that is how a hunt group works. At this point, I do want to take another short break and answer any questions that have come up here. Heidi, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Can you go back to simultaneous ring?
Sure.
With the simultaneous ring, is ring per member and no answer the same setting?
So with simultaneous rings per member is not a big deal because it only looks for the no answer number of rings. So you don't need to worry about it. Rings per member only comes into play if you're using the top-down group. And that's where you want to make sure that the rings per member and the no answer number rings is appropriate for your level. Like I was talking about before, if you want 3 different users to be rang 3 times, you want to make sure that your no answer number is 9 and your rings per member is 3. But if you're using simultaneous ring, it only cares about the no answer number of rings.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then this question might be answered better when you talk work group. However, here's the question. Is the no answer and call stack option the way to get a call to go to a work group so the call can be routed to voicemail?
Yes, it is. That's actually exactly how we set them up in our environment, and that's the recommended way to do that. So what you would do is you would build a work group that's set to always forward to voicemail. And then in your no answer or call stack full, or both, if you wanted to go there in each option there, you would put in the extension of that work group for those destinations. So then once you reach the no answer number of rings on the hunt group, it would forward to that work group, which would then automatically go to voicemail, and then you would have that voicemail saved.
Thank you. That is the end of the questions for this section.
All right, perfect. So the next piece that we're going to go into now is work groups, and this is going to be a lot of the same, but there's a few extra settings. So I'm gonna kind of give an overview of the settings on the work group that we've already kind of covered, and then I'm going to go more in depth on the settings that are different. So this is your template work group page. It will always say new work group when you build a new one. And just like on the hunt groups here, if you want to go to this page, all you have to do is on the left-hand side, you just click on work groups, which is its own option. You don't even have to drill down into another menu. And just like the hunt groups page, it's going to give you a list of all the groups in your system. At that point, you can either hit new or you can click on an existing group to modify it. So this is a new work group here. And so just like before on the Hunt group, you've got your name, which is what will be presented to your users when a call comes in as well. So if you name this PDX sales, it'll come through as PDX sales so that your users know how to answer the call. Extension works exactly the same as the Hunt group. So in this case, that 1810 that we were using for the Hunt group would be the work group extension here, and you can change that if you need to. And calling that extension would get to the work group. And backup extension is exactly the same. That will be where the call will go if the work group is not available. And to tie that back, what we often do at Inflow and what we recommend is to have a backup Hunt group available and use that as a backup extension for a call if the work group is unavailable. That way you still have a group option to accept calls. So if you have a server outage, maybe you're running VMware and the host goes down for whatever reason or anything like that, when the call comes in, the system will recognize that the work group's not available. It'll go to the backup extension. And if the backup extension is a Hunt group with the same members, then you can still present those calls to those members in a more limited fashion. You wouldn't have queue handling or the ability for voicemail, but at least you would be able to get those calls into the hands of the right people. Under that is Workgroup Server, and this works exactly the same as the switch drop-down menu does on the Hunt group side. The difference is instead of going to a switch, you're going to a server. So if you have multiple servers, DVSs in your system, this is how you would delegate which server actually handles that workgroup for you. So if you have a local DVS server on site for the group, you would want to put that workgroup on that server so that it is all local to the group and you're not using network bandwidth. And if you run into a situation where one server is down, just like with the switch, you can use this dropdown to move the workgroup to another server. And then that will allow you to keep going with your group calls and your voicemail capabilities. Under that is your DID range, and DID number does work exactly the same as the Hunt group. You don't have to put a DID on there, but if you want a direct number, that's how you would do it. Otherwise, you could do something like put the option for the work group on an auto attendant menu that people are already accessing so that they would be able to get to the group that way. And it is the same with DNIS as well. So if you had 3 different locations, again, the LA, Portland, and Seattle example, you could actually DNIS map all 3 numbers to the same group and have a little note so you would know if it was LA sales or Seattle sales that was calling in, and you could respond appropriately. You have your user group here as well. That is actually a difference from the Hunt group, and this is because user groups are where voicemail capabilities are outlined for a specific group. So the work group, when you set it up, will actually follow the mailbox guidelines of whatever user group you have the work group in. So you want to make sure that the user group that you are using is set up so that you are able to accept the amount of voicemails you want, have those voicemails be the length you want as well. So this is where you would govern that. Under this is your mailbox server, and you'll notice there's a checkbox as well as a dropdown. The checkbox just basically tells the system whether or not this work group has voicemail. You can take that away if you want, if you don't want to have voicemail on that particular work group. If you do have it and you do want it though, this drop down here is where you would select the server that handles your voicemail. We highly recommend that you keep the workgroup server and the mailbox server the exact same, just to make sure you know exactly where everything is. But if you absolutely needed to, you could set it up so that the server that handles the calls is one server and the server that handles voicemails is another. If you do change this on the fly, the system will use SMTP to actually sync the files to the other location. So that's important to note. If there's an issue with the server though, like you're moving this because the server is down, that synchronization may not happen. So that's something to keep in mind. It will have issues with that if it can't use SMTP to get the messages across. And then there is a language option here as well. That's for the actual voicemail menu if you were to dial in and listen to voicemail. By default, this is always just going to be English unless you have other language packs installed in your system. So if you had a Spanish work group that needed a Spanish language for the voice menu options when they called in to check their voicemail, you could change that here. You also have those two checkboxes we talked about before, the dial by name directory and the make number private. Those work exactly the same as they do on the Hunt group, but you also have one new one, which says accept broadcast messages. And this ties in with the fact that the work groups have the ability to do voicemail. A broadcast message is going to be a distribution voicemail that gets sent out to multiple people. You can uncheck this box to not send those distribution voicemails to the work group, or if you have it checked, then the work group will accept a copy so that people in the work group can see that. So just so you know that you have that option there. Under there is a number of specific things for work groups that are not in Hunt groups. The first one is a recorded name. This is just like when you first log in to your voicemail on the Director platform for your individual user profile. It will ask you to record your name, and that's used for voicemail purposes until there's a greeting that's been set up. You can record your name from Director here if you want to, or you could actually import a file as well. It's not something that you're going to normally use though, because normally there will be an actual greeting for this. Under that is your voicemail password. If you wanted to dial in and check voicemail on this work group, you would actually, you would go to your voicemail login, and when you were prompted for your password, you would hit pound. The system would then ask you for your extension, and the way that you would get into this work group voicemail in that method would be to enter the extension of the work group and then the voicemail password, which is outlined here. The default is 1234, and it can be configured for any 4-digit number that you want. And the system will ask you to type it in once and then confirm it in the box to the right here. Enable automatic agent logout on ring no answer. This is another option that work groups have over Hunt groups. And so let's say I'm part of a support work group, and I get presented a call, and I don't pick up the call, and it moves to the next agent. If this box is checked, it will actually automatically log me out of the work group, so I won't be presented another call because the system is assuming that I'm just not there. This can be beneficial, but there are some drawbacks, specifically if you're using a work group without the appropriate licensing so that the agent can log themselves back in or that a supervisor can log them back in. This can present a hassle administratively because you would have to then go into the system, into the Edit Agents button, which I'm going to show you here momentarily, and then log those users in. So that's something that you do have to keep in mind there. Bear with me 1 second here. I need to do one quick thing. Let's see. Just had to save it so I can go into the next menu because it will force you to save here. There is a option for your workgroup membership and your workgroup queue handling under here. I'm going to briefly go over agents because it's very similar to what we looked at with Hunt groups. But to click into here, you're going to have the same options as before. You've got the 2 panes, and you can choose who you want to put in the group. And just as before, you can select a range. You can select multiple individuals at one time if you want as well. And you add them in the same fashion. But the other piece here, if you read down here, double click the user in the right box if you need to change his logged in status. If you double click it, it's actually going to bring up a little menu where you can change their access license, which is the individual user's access license if you want to set them to be like a workgroup agent or supervisor or operator if you have the correct licensing for it. And then you can also change their agent status. So this is where you would change everybody's status if you needed to do it from the back end. It's a little bit more cumbersome than doing it through the client with the appropriate licensing. But if you don't have the licensing, you can do it this way. If you want to set up a group a work group with agents that can take calls, but you don't want to use the licensing or don't have the licensing available, when you add them to the group, you want to make sure they're set to logged in, and then you hit OK. And you'll actually see next to their name, once you do it, it'll say logged in. And that will keep them logged in so that they will be able to make and receive, or not make calls, but they'll be able to receive calls. So that'll give you what you need. And that's where that ties in with that box for the automatic logout. If they don't have the licensing to log back in, you would have to come into this page and log them back in order to do it. So that's something to keep in mind for that. Going back to the page here, we're now going to go over queue handling. This is an optional setting, but what this is a series of 5 steps that you can set up in the system so that you can present menu options to callers while they're waiting on hold. And so you have different options that you can set up. The top is for your alert thresholds. And what this is for your agents that are in the system for workgroup usage. So anybody with workgroup agent or workgroup supervisor licensing has the ability to access queue the queue monitor. The queue monitor will show every queue that they're a part of, how many calls are available in queue, and how long the longest call has been in queue. And what this threshold is for is it'll actually play a sound in the client for your users when they reach a certain number of calls in queue, or the amount of time that calls have been waiting. The default is 3 calls or more in queue, or a call that's been waiting over 60 seconds. So you can actually adjust this to whatever you need for your group. And that goes in with the queue handling here. The queue, you also have the ability to allow agents to pick up directly from the queue. That goes in with the queue monitor there. That would allow them to see the calls that are available, and it would allow them to double click and select the call that they want to pick up. So this is something that you would want to have on if your agents are going to be able to do that. This does allow them to cherry pick calls, so that is something to keep in mind. But it will allow them to see a list of all the calls in their queue monitor and actually answer those calls on the fly. Under that is the real meat of queue handling. And this is the big part of work groups to me. This is where the work groups are really, really important. You have a series of 5 different steps that you can set up in the system. You don't have to use all of them. You can actually skip steps if you only want 1 or 2 steps available. You can also have the system announce the estimated wait time, which will be based on the average queue handling time that it sees in its built-in reporting. So it can give your callers a estimate of how long they can expect to be on hold. Under that, you also have the ability to set the amount of time until you move from step 1 to step 2, for example. And so what this would be is it'll play whatever message that you want to have available to your callers. Then it would play hold music. And then when that timer has been exceeded, it will move to the next step where you could have another message. So you can actually have up to 5 unique messages as a part of this. Prompt text works exactly the same way as it does on an auto attendant. It's just a note. Oh, what is that? Apologies. I don't know why there is a timer on my phone there. But this is just a notification area so that you can tell your administrators at a glance what this queue is supposed to show. This would just be an informational field. Under that is where you can actually supply the prompt. And you'll note that it says required for this step to function. So you do need to have a prompt that we can load in order to make this step work. And this will play and then give people any options that you want. So you can do something as simple as please wait on the line, we'll be with you as quickly as possible. Or you could do something like, if you'd like to press 1 to leave a voicemail, you can do so now. It's important to note they have to do it while the prompt is playing. It's not something they can do at any time, but while the prompt is going, they will have options available to them, which you can see under here. It's kind of like a miniature auto attendant menu. And so for each one of these numbers, you can set up a specific destination or function. So you could set up pressing 1 to repeat the prompt that was just played, go to a specific auto attendant menu, transfer to a specific extension, which could be another group or a specific person. You could also set it to take a message and go to a group. So a popular method of using these queue handling options is to have the option to press 1 to leave the queue and actually enter the voicemail box of the group. Or you can even, if you want to, set this to hang up. So you have all those options available to you, and they work together. So you have steps 1 through 5. If you only want like 2 or 3 of these steps, you can skip step 1, 2, and 3, for example, and then you could uncheck the skip on step 4, and it would start there. And it will just continue through based on the amount of time you have built in until it would move to the next step. And these can all be changed as well. So step 1 could wait for 20 seconds and step 2 could be a minute. You can definitely do that if you so choose. The last step as well also offers the ability for overflow or an interflow. So a popular way to do this is to set it up so that after all these steps have been exhausted, at that point, maybe the caller's been on hold for 5-10 minutes. You can send the calls directly to voicemail at that point just to make sure that they aren't hanging out on hold. Otherwise, you can leave this blank and it will keep people in the queue. Now, going back to the main workgroup page here. Wrap-up time is how long the system will put a agent automatically in wrap-up so that they can write up notes and have stuff for the call that they just had before they could be presented another call. By default, that's set to 0, so they will immediately get another call as soon as they're off a call. If you want to give them 10 or 20 seconds, this is where you would enter that here. And then current call handling mode, just like a hunt group, the work group will show you what a call handling mode it is currently in. So right now our work group is currently on hours because I don't have a schedule applied. If it were off hours, it would show off hours. And if it were a holiday, it would show that it's in a holiday mode. If you see a call handling mode that doesn't match up with what it should be for that day, again, a good way to re-jog the work group is to take the schedule off the work group, save it, and then go back and resave the schedule back on it. That will force the work group to reinitialize and usually will fix those problems. Common issues with that can also be if the server that they reside on has a different time zone applied to it than it should, because it does work off the time of the server itself for those schedules. Then under here, this is where you handle all of your call routing. So you have 4 options in a work group. This is a little bit more robust than the hunt groups here. You have on hours, you have your off hours routing, you also have holiday and custom. They all work exactly the same. And you can set up specific schedules. So if I wanted to set an on hours schedule, I could do that here. You can also set up an escalation profile, which is for voicemails. So you can set it up so that when a voicemail is left, you could email a specific distribution list of users using those profiles, and that would be something that we would cover in another training. Call handling modes. You'll notice that top down and simultaneous are here, but you also have 2 other options: round robin and longest idle. Round robin is just like top down, the difference being it doesn't restart on the first user every single time. So if you get presented a call and the first user gets that call, the next call that comes in will actually start with user 2, and it will work circular in that regard. Longest idle is self-explanatory. It will go to the person that hasn't been on the phone for the longest amount of time. It is worth noting that is for any calls, not just work group calls. So if I just took an internal call, and I just hung up, I am now at the bottom of that list. So that is important to note. Then you have all of your different call forward options. And if you want, you can set it to always go to a destination. That would be for a work group that's going to be only voicemail, for example. Otherwise, it's going to typically be no answer or busy. And you can set the different destinations here, including external numbers. So for busy, no answer, and logged out, if all of your agents are logged out of the group, you can set your destinations here. And you'll note that in addition to extension and internal, or in extension external rather, busy, no answer, and logged out all have the ability to go to the queue, which goes and ties in with the queue handling options that we talked about before. So if you get to a point where everybody's busy, everybody's on a call, and you want them to use the queue handling options at that point, you would set it to queue instead of go to voicemail. Same thing on no answer. So if you have agents that are available, but they didn't get to the call immediately, but you want it to go to the queue so that they will get the call, you would set that to queue as well. Logged out has that ability. I wouldn't recommend it because if all your agents are logged out, they're not going to see the calls in queue. But you do have the ability to do that as well. And so this is where the system will send calls if it notices that the group should be accepting calls right now, but there's nobody in and logged into the group in order to get those calls. So it's kind of a fail-safe to make sure that you don't lose those calls because nobody's there. And right under that, just like with the Hunt group, you have your number of rings per agent and your no answer number of rings. For simultaneous ring, the no answer number of rings is what you care about. And the rings per agent will come into play with all of the others. So if you had 10 agents in your group, you wanted each one to get 2 rings, you would set your rings per agent to 2 and your no answer number of rings to 20. That way it would go through, ring each agent that was available twice. And after 20 rings, or after it realized that everybody was busy, which is also something that can occur here, it would go to either the busy destination if everybody's not available, or the no answer number of rings if if there are people that are available but they are not answering their phone. And then finally, you have your mailbox options here. Your workgroup greeting, that's going to be your greeting that people hear if they get to voicemail, and this can be changed depending on the call handling mode. So you could have a different greeting based on your on hours, your off hours, your holiday, and your custom scheduling. So you can set that up here. You can import files, or you can use a phone or PC microphone to record the greeting here for the workgroup. And then you also have the ability for a workgroup assistant. That's if somebody presses 1 while they're in the workgroup voicemail to be waiting to leave a message. You can set up a workgroup assistant so that if they press 1, it will go to that destination. And then finally, you have enable message notification, which will let the people in the workgroup know that they've received the voicemail message in the workgroup. They'll actually also see this in their communicator client. There will be a workgroups tab that will show them the voicemails that, or actually, let me jog that back. I've been doing a lot of work in Connect lately. In Communicator, in the voicemail tab, there will be a second slot for each workgroup that the user is a part of that has voicemail. So it does separate it out from personal voicemail, and they will be able to see if, for example, this PDX sales workgroup were to get a voicemail message, and that would apply to everybody in the group. So anybody in that group would be able to listen to it. And just like your normal voicemails in Communicator, anything that isn't listened to will appear bold. Anything that has been listened to will just be regular. So they will know if somebody else has listened to it as well. And to tie that back with the question we had earlier, and how to get a Hunt group to go to a work group and vice versa, these call forward options on the work group are exactly how you would handle that if you wanted to send a work group somewhere else. And you would just put in the extension that you wanted the calls to forward to after they have reached either the no answer number of rings or if everybody was busy. So that can be done on here for a work group as well. But the common way that we do this is to set up a Hunt group in front that once the hunt group is not able to get to a user, would then go to a work group, which would serve as the voicemail box. And this is nice because you can then set up the hunt group at the remote location, and you don't have to rely on that network bandwidth to do a live call. It's just going back for voicemail, so then the users at the remote site can check those on demand. And that is how a work group operates. At this time, do we have any specific questions on work groups?
We do.
Okay.
Can you go, excuse me, to the top of the screen where you have the field backup extension?
Yes.
Is there any limitations there? Can a backup extension be an employee's cell phone number?
So a backup extension could be an employee's cell phone number, but it would have to be set up as a user extension in the system. So the extension does have to be an extension that resides in the ShoreTel system. But the easiest way to do that would be to set the backup user to be the user that you want, and then externally assign the user to their cell phone. What would happen in that case is the backup destination would be accessed when the work group wasn't able to answer the call for whatever reason, maybe the server's down. And then once that call is routed to the user extension would send that out to the cell phone because it would know that it's externally assigned. So there's a couple extra steps. You can't just put a cell phone number in this field, but you can do what you're looking to do.
All right. And what about if somebody wants to create a work group where agents are always logged in and never log out? What do they need to know there?
Sure. So all you need to do for that is once you create the group, and you do need to save the group first, the first time before you can enter the Edit Agents tab, which is why I saved it before. You would then click on Edit Agents here. There we go. And for your agents that you want to have in the group, all you want to do is you want to add them to the right side. And then for each agent that you have in the group, you want to double click the agent. That's going to bring up this pop-up box here. And then you will select Logged In and then hit OK. And then when you're done with the agents there, you would hit Save. This will keep them in a logged in state, and if they don't have the access to log themselves out, so they don't have workgroup agent licensing or anything like that, then they would remain logged in, and this would never change. The only difference for that being if you do actually use the automatic logout on no answer checkbox, which is why I don't recommend that. But if you go in and you put the users into the group, you double click them and you log them in and you save that, they will be logged in. And unless they log themselves out using something like a workgroup agent, they will always be logged in.
Tom, can you talk about licensing for work groups? The question is, for work group stats, do the agents who would always be logged in need to have the agent license in order to have their manager see their stats?
No. As long as a agent is part of a work group, you would still be able to see the agent stats. They don't need to have licensing for that specifically. Where the licensing comes in handy is for being able to see the queue and the queue monitor, and for the supervisors, they can log people in and out themselves as well. So that's where that comes in handy, just ease of use of the queue. Or if you have a group where maybe a couple hours out of the day they are doing off the phone projects and you don't want them to get the group calls in the middle of there, that's where those licenses come into play. But for all the other features, as long as the agent is part of the group and they're logged in and able to receive calls, their metrics will show up in reporting.
Thank you. All right, so this next question talks about different alerts. So on step 1 of your settings, you said you can choose how many calls, how many seconds they're on hold. Once that is set, there's an alert. And does the alert, who sees the alert? Does it go to somebody?
So these alerts go hand in hand with the queue monitor that's built into Communicator for those people with the agent, supervisor or agent or workgroup agent licenses. And that's where these will be shown. So what you would see in the queue monitor is once you hit this threshold, there will be two things actually. There is an alert sound, which is quite loud to make sure it gets people's attention. And you will also see the threshold that's been hit displayed in red. So you'll know that that's the issue there. So for example, on my page here, the defaults are three or more calls or 60 or more seconds. So if I called this group and I was on hold and it went to 1 minute and 1 second, you would hear the alert. And then on the queue monitor page in Communicator, you would see the amount of time that I've been waiting on hold displayed in a bold red to indicate that that's where the issue lies. So this will be seen by anybody with workgroup agent or workgroup supervisor licenses. If you don't have that, they would not see that. So that is important to note. That is a part of the workgroup licensing feature.
All right. And then can you give a brief overview, another explanation of the escalation profile field and how that works?
Sure. So let me go ahead and I'll jump in here real quick just to show you. Essentially what escalation profiles are for voicemails that come into a group, and this actually does apply to individual users as well. You can set up escalation profiles there if you so chose. You can set up an email address for delivery. So if you had a sales work group that also has a sales distribution list, for example, you could set up that distribution email in the email address field, and you can set up whether or not you want the message should be sent in the email, or you can even send a WAV file with the actual message. And you can also set it so that if the mailbox is full, the agents will be sent a message as well so that they can clear up the mailbox. You can also set up forwarding if you so chose. So if you wanted to forward any voicemails from a specific group or user to a specific mailbox in the system, you can do that, and that is based on extension. And if you're doing that, you can also delete. You can also delete the message after forwarding, which will clear up clutter on the system so you don't have voicemails in two different locations. But the big piece for the escalation profiles, and this is something that we would get into in another training, is you can set up specific steps. So let's say I leave a voicemail. It's after hours. This is actually how our support environment works. And nobody has listened to the message yet. After 5 minutes, you can set up the system to go in and, for example, call everybody in the group to make sure that people know that there's a voicemail. So just to show you a little bit here, there's a number of steps, which is why this is going to be for another training down the road. But you can set a timeout where then once you hit this timing, so for example, after 10 minutes, you can set it up to send the email again. You can also notify by phone so that you can call certain people or even an external number as well. So that's how the escalation profile works. It's a good way to make sure that your agents know that they have a voicemail waiting for them.
All right. Well, that is the end of our questions.
Excellent.
So if you have any final words on the difference between work groups, hunt groups, or key learnings that you've come across, now would be a great time to mention it.
Sure. So thank you for taking the time to go through this training with me today. Really, the key concepts of what we went over today is the differences and similarities of the hunt groups and where to use them as a general overview to that. If you have a remote site that only has a ShoreTel switch, a hunt group may make more sense in your environment. If you need to take multiple calls at one time, a hunt group is better for that as well. Otherwise, the work group is going to give you a lot more functionality and also ease the strain on your system. You can use them in tandem by linking them together using the call forwarding options, such as the busy destination or no answer destination in the system. And the queue handling options may very well make your call center environment more robust and easier to use and manage. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to let us know. I believe we have an email set up that we're monitoring for common questions as well that we will handle. In addition, this webinar will be up on our website probably in a few days here once we get it encoded and up on the site, but this will be available so that you can take another look at it if you want to come back and review some more options. And as always, if you do want to reach out to us, you can certainly give us a call if you do have any specific questions, and we will be happy to assist you.